Thank you for this opportunity. The pressure is really on with my bosses all sitting back there in the corner, so try not to make a fool of myself. But this is something that is really important when we talk about communication, and specifically crisis communication, because there's almost nothing else that could make you or break you when it comes to effective good communication, bad communication, or lack of communication. And so that's why it's so important. And so my job with the state police is PIO, it's Public Information Officer. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Indianapolis District, which covers Marion County and all the surrounding counties. I am, for lack of anything else, I'm the only PIO for our district. I'm on call 24/7. I answer my call, my phone from the beaches of Florida or the mountains of Colorado. I'm still answering phone calls. And it's important to do that because if you are the communicator for your school, you're a salesman. You may not be selling a product, but you're selling an image. And that's what's so important about effective communication and being on the forefront of things like social media and news releases and news media relationships, because the person who's talking is the salesman. And I've been a police officer my whole life, right? It's all I ever wanted to do, it's all I ever knew. I was 20 years old when I got hired by the state police. I don't know anything different. But when I became the PIO about 4 years ago, I didn't know a lot about it. As a road trooper for so many years, you'd be at a big scene, the PIO would show up, he'd go over, he'd shake hands with the media, he'd take some pictures, he'd talk to them, and then he'd leave. I thought, wow, that looks pretty good, I can handle that, right? And so the position came open. I thought, hey, I can do it. I have no formal training. My major in college was elementary education. I wasn't, I have no background in communication. And when I got the job, boy, I had no idea what really happened. It was so much more than standing in front of a camera giving a statement. I mean, that's probably 10% of actually the communications that I have to do on a daily basis. And now with technology as it evolves, not only am I having to monitor a cell phone, I'm having to monitor email and social media and all these different things that could be overwhelming. What I'm finding, especially when it comes to crisis communication, is in schools, and my experience with schools, is the decision makers, administrators, superintendents, principals, things like that, tend to also be your communicators. They are kind of your PIOs. But what happens in a crisis situation is they're gone. They're not there to communicate. By gone, I don't mean they're not there. I mean, they have other responsibilities. And that's exactly one of the things that we faced at Noblesville West Middle School. And I was on scene there, and I was one of the communicators for that. And I'm going to get into that here just a little bit, but I'm going to talk about the roles within your school about these communicators and some things that maybe you need to think about. So again, I'm going to talk, the title, Who's Telling Your Story? I'm going to start with social media because it is so important. We live in a world where social media is not going away. Whether you like it or hate it, I can tell you that it's the future of the way people are going to get their news, their information. So you can either join the conversation and be part of the conversation, or you can sit back and let the conversation pass you by and not have a seat at that table. And I'm really fortunate. I wasn't a social media guru, but now I'm very involved in it. I'm very fortunate that I work for a department that recognizes that. We understand there are pros and cons to having those social media accounts, but the pros outweigh the cons because we're able to directly communicate to our customer. And have those interactions on a different level. And so that's why I feel like social media is so important. And this thing here will kind of show you some staggering numbers that I found pretty surprising about social media. even though we're all public agencies and officials and not really selling a product, you do have an image to upstand. And what's so important about selling that positive image is every once in a while something happens to tarnish that image. We live in a world as law enforcement. Every once in a while, one of our troopers does something that gives us a black eye. But our positive engagement, our positive relationships with the public and with the media really help soften that blow. I mean, there are many conversations that I've had with reporters who want to do a story that's going to reflect on us negatively as the Indiana State Police, but because I've built a relationship with that reporter, I can say, hey, tell me your purpose. Like, why are you trying to bash us? What good is this story going to do? And a lot of times that conversation leads to more of a positive story or no story at all. And so that's why those relationships and having that positive public image is so important. So how do you gain followers? Because social media, from a school standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint, can't just be something you put on the back burner, expect to use only when you need it. You've got to be willing to commit, because you're going to have to build that following. Because in the moment of an emergency, when you have to get a message out, and you say, hey, we're going to use social media, but you don't have anybody that's going to see that message. The more followers you have, the faster this message is going to expand. And get creative with ways to gain followers on your school's websites. Be creative. I've seen a lot of things, viral videos that go out about different things that schools have done that make them nationally known. I mean, you guys probably all saw the videos this winter of the superintendent who would wrap the school closings and the snow days and things like that. Like, those things are huge to build that following, because then when you need an emergency communication, your audience is there. Be fun and be personable. Don't be a robot. Try to create a personality almost with your social media account. Photos and videos. If you can attach a photo or a video to your message, it's 40 times more likely to be shared. Okay? Scrolling through your news feed, you need something that grabs your attention, right? I may have a simple tweet that would say, hey, I-465 is closed, and I don't have any pictures to use for that. I'll Google road closed sign, and I'll take that image and put road closed sign on there. Just something so simple, but that photo is going to get somebody to stop on that message and read it. Live videos. People like the ability to see the uncut, raw version of your message, right? So think about using that Facebook Live, that Twitter, the Periscope that goes along with Twitter or whatever it may be. Remember that with edited videos, your time, especially on Twitter, is limited on how long that video can be. But if you go live, it can be as long as you need to. So if you have an information that's going to be more than 2 minutes, go live with it. Maybe it takes some time to get comfortable going live. You know, you can't really mess up too bad, but sometimes people appreciate that. Back in 2017, a simple message can go so far. I was fed up with people not using their turn signals. I took my phone out in selfie mode, and I made about a 1-minute video about how to use a turn signal, right? Pretty simple. Didn't expect it, but it's had over 130 million views on Facebook, right? So something so simple, something that you don't expect, really can get people's attention. And that's what using social media is so important. But never forget your school's brand and image, right? If you type, trust me, this happens to me all the time. You type up a tweet or a Facebook message and you read it out loud. And if you have to ask yourself, is this appropriate? The answer is no. Like, if you're even questioning, should I say this or not? The answer is no. So don't post it. So type it up, read it out loud, and if you're questioning it, don't send it. If you type it up, you read it out loud, and you're like, I'm pretty sure, then sit on it for a few minutes, a few hours, talk to other people, right? You have to understand that you have an image and a brand. And what's really hard is to understand what perception your message is going to receive. See, sometimes you can put a message out there with the best of intentions, and one person perceives it the wrong way and flips it on you. And now it's become something negative. And that's what's really hard about social media, is there's no body language, there's no sarcasm. Sometimes things are just taken out of context. So be careful with that. But that's one rule, is if you have to question it, the answer is no. Don't do it. Stay away from, obviously, as a public social media, stay away from politics, current events, controversial topics. Don't retweet them, don't like them, don't share them. Stick to your message, your brand, your image. And always look for the good social media story, right? It may not be any big deal in your school for a teacher to use her own money to buy a backpack for a kid. I'm just pulling that out of nowhere. Or school supplies. Great touchy-feely story. If you can put that on social media somehow, it will be huge. Everybody loves those good feel-good stories. If I'm driving past a trooper on the side of the road who's changing a tire for somebody, I'm going to stop and see if I can help, obviously. But the other thing in the back of my mind is, I want a picture. I want a picture of this because I want to put it on Twitter. I want to put it on Facebook. I want the public to know what we're really doing out here. Just like I want the public to know what's really going on in our schools. Snap that picture of that teacher giving a kid a hug or a high five or a fist bump. Put it on Twitter and with some catchy message. That's how you're going to build your following and increase your followers. Now, what about crisis communication? What happens when something awful happens? And keep in mind, the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about crisis communication to schools is active shooters. I mean, I can't think of a worse crisis that could happen in your school. But it's not only active shooters that you have to plan for, right? Understand that when you're communicating about your crisis, who are you talking to? Who's your audience? Because you have to understand that. When I'm putting out a message on Twitter, I don't see it as my audience is the media, right? The media is going to pick it up and I'm going to use them, but my audience is my community. My audience is the stakeholders, superintendent, you got your school board, elected officials. That's who I'm talking to. You're talking to parents, you're talking to students, you're talking to other teachers. You're communicating with emergency responders. So in a crisis communication, when you're putting out messages through your social media, don't feel like you're talking to the media. I want you to talk like you're talking to the parents, to your neighbor, to the law enforcement officers who are responding to your scene. That's who I want you to think about you're talking to. The media is going to catch it and they're going to do. But this is what I love about social media is I don't have to rely on the news media to get my information out there. They're going to. When something bad is happening, the first place people are going to look is the social media of that school, that community, or whatever. If they can't find anything, the next thing is they're going to start going to the news media stations. And the news media actually pay people. Their full-time job 24/7 is to sit in a command center or whatever, listen to the police radios and watch social media. That's what they get paid to do. And so I also know that they're always watching too. But one of the issues, and when I responded to the Noblesville West, I was off duty that day. I had taken the day off to go to my son's kindergarten picnic at his school at Sheridan, but I responded. My initial response was, I am a police officer responding to an active shooter. Once everything settled down, my role changed to communicator, right? So how many of you in this room are communicators for your school, PIOs, whatever you may want it, but could likely have a different role in a crisis? That's one of the problems that we ran into in Noblesville. The PIO for the Noblesville Police Department is a lieutenant. He handles all of their PIO stuff, same job that I have. But he also handles so much more within his police agency. When Noblesville West was attacked, not only did he have supervisory roles and police officer roles, he had a student in that building, his own child was in that building. So that communicator was off the table to us as far as helping us get these messages out. The school administrators obviously had so many other things, right? Noblesville West, they have a marketing firm. They hired a company to handle their communications. So we're now waiting for those communicators to show up to help us get messages. In the meantime, nobody's putting anything out. Nobody's talking to the media. Noblesville Police Department's social media, non-existent. Noblesville School social media, nothing's happening. So what do? Right? Some PIOs from the state police showed up. We converged. We said, hey, we've got to do something. I mean, there's panic. There's chaos. There's people running everywhere. And we were pretty much told from the decision makers, hey, we're going to have a press conference at 11:30. Nobody talks to the media until 11:30. And then we're like 45 minutes away from that. And one of the best things that happened was this message that I put up here on this tweet right here. We didn't give details. We didn't give it, but this was the moment that I feel like calmed everything. And I copied what somebody else said. But I tweeted this out on the state police Twitter, and it just simply says, there are 2 victims en route to Methodist from Noblesville West Middle School active shooter. Those families have been notified. That was the biggest part of that, I feel like. The suspect's in custody, and now I'm giving everybody a call to action. We want you to go to the high school and pick your kids up. So, giving them something. It's okay to say we're not talking to the media until 11:30, but you've got to understand, you have people that are converging on this community, driving like I've never seen people do. I saw 3 cars run through a red light at about 80 miles an hour in front of me, and they were parents. They weren't first responders, they were parents. So you've got to figure out a message that's going to calm everything. And the importance, you can see, I screen grabbed this because I wanted to show you, 903,895 people saw this tweet. 903,000, that's how quickly you can communicate to a mass of people, right? Then people start retweeting it, and the more eyes you get on it, the more you can calm this down. Now, after this, we didn't say anything else until the press conference, but find something to say during that crisis that will give a call to action and will give a calming effect. Like, hey, this is what, yes, sir.
Did you have authority to send that out?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is I did it on my own. Your communicators, your PIOs have got to be empowered to be a decision maker, okay? I'll tell you, let's say there's a police crisis and the superintendent is there on scene. He trusts that I'm going to give the correct information, and I don't have to come to him and say, hey, guess what? I want to do this. He's too busy to approve what I want to say. You've got to have a trusting person in that position that you know is going to say the right thing. It's more not just what you say, it's body language, it's effective communication. But giving that person the authority is key. And I see this so many times, not just in law enforcement, in schools, well, I'd love to send out this tweet, but my chief has to approve it, or superintendent principal. Or think about who has access to your social media. It's usually the administration. So make sure those communicators have training, but most importantly, that they have the authority to make a decision. Because something like this, you know, I communicated with other PIOs, said, hey, we're thinking about saying this. What do you think? Yeah, absolutely. Never be afraid to ask. Never be afraid to ask. And the other thing that I've learned is this. As a PIO, as a communicator, it is okay, not only okay, it's encouraged to ask for help. So many times I've been involved in a crisis. Unfortunately, in my career, I've been the PIO for 2 police officers who have been shot and killed in the line of duty. I was involved in the Delphi as a communicator. Noblesville West Middle School as a communicator. Those things are hard. And in those early moments, you get calls from PIOs that you work with, and they're like, hey, need anything? No, I got it, I'm good. And then by the time you realize you need help, it's too late. It's too late. You're already overwhelmed. You're already consumed. So don't be afraid to reach out. I don't care who gets credit, right? And a lot of times that's one of the hardest things is if it's a Noblesville Police Department issue, they don't really want a state trooper standing in front of the camera telling their story. That's just the way things work. You know, you're from one school. You don't want administrators from another school telling your story. But it's okay to show up and be in the background. You know what? I can write emails. I can answer emails. I don't care if my name, my picture, I don't care if any of that's ever mentioned. I'm just here to help. So hopefully that's kind of the mentality amongst schools as well. Is don't be afraid to reach out to that neighboring school and say, hey, we need a communicator. We need help with our communications. I think that's a big thing. You've got to know what platforms you're going to use and how you're going to use them, whatever that is, whether that's an email system, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, a text system. You've got to know how that works, know how you're going to use it, and know who can use that. That also comes into if the only person that has access to send out this mass text message to all the parents is the principal or superintendent who are so engaged with other things. How are you going to get that message out? Who has the authority to do that? We talk about, one thing that we say as PIOs is stay in your lane. Talk about what you are supposed to talk about. If I'm on the scene of a horrific fire, as a police officer, I'm not going to stand up and talk about the fire. That's the fire department's job. I don't know about it, right? As a school, if the Indiana State Police is in your school investigating something, we have a case, and the media comes to you and says, hey, tell us about this state police investigation, don't talk about the state police investigation, right? I'm not saying that because, oh, you know, it's ours, we shouldn't talk about it. I'm saying that because we have a strategy, you have a strategy, stay in your lane. And this will happen so often. The media will try to trick you. And this happens to me all the time. Let's say a police officer gets arrested for a DUI at another agency, not even a trooper, but that agency's not talking about it. So I'll get a random call on a Monday morning from a reporter who says, hey, I know you can't talk about that, but could you just run us through like field sobriety, what happens on a DUI stop, like what do you guys look for in impaired drivers? Any other day of the week, I'd be all over that. Yeah, that's a chance for me to, but I know exactly what you're about to do. You're going to run this story about the arrested police officer and segue into, well, we spoke to the Indiana State Police about what a DUI stop looks, and now what's it look like? It looks like I'm talking about their stop. Don't get caught in that trick bag. If the media starts calling you, asking about policy and procedure, your red flag should be going up. Because they might call you, a neighboring school might have a situation, and they didn't handle it well. They didn't communicate well. They're not communicating, whatever it may be. They may call you and say, how would you guys deal with this situation? What if you don't know what's going on at that school, and you tell them, hey, this is our policy, this is our procedure, and then at the 6 o'clock news comes on, and here's your school talking about how this school should have handled it. So don't let the media get you in that trick bag, because they will, and they'll try. They will try. So if they're asking odd questions, put those red flags up. And don't be afraid, and I'm going to talk about how to handle the media here shortly. Don't be afraid to have those conversations with them about, hey, where are you going with this? So keep that in mind. Make sure you are putting out factual information. We don't have the option of being wrong. And if you do find out you're wrong, you've got to correct it as soon as possible. It was once said, and I think it was Tom Brokaw that said this. It says, if you are first, nobody will remember. If you are wrong, nobody will forget. Okay? There's this rush out there to get that information. I mean, we live in a world where you have about 30 seconds to get ahead of social media or your stories out there. Don't be in such a rush. You will never beat social media, okay? You as a school, as a communicator, will never be ahead of social media, but you can catch up to it. You can catch up to it by putting out your factual information and becoming a valuable resource. But don't think you have to be, just because something's going out on social media, you might need to address that. This is a rumor, we will have the facts out later. This is not true, whatever that address might be. But don't let that stress you out. Make sure. Another, and I wish I could own it, but I don't. I'll steal it from somebody, I don't know who said it, but it says, the loudest voice will be heard until the credible voice speaks. The loudest voice will be heard until the credible voice speaks. You are the credible voice. Don't let, because, you know, I've been in situations before where we're not ready to release information. And then all of a sudden, some reporter gets that information from somewhere, and he gets in front of the camera without talking to us, and boom, this is what I know, and he's accurate. I'm not going to come out and say he's wrong or whatever. Now it's time we got to change our plan, and we're going to have to come out with this information, and we're going to have to come out with the facts now. Don't let the media drive your messaging, but it's okay to respond to them. And it's absolutely okay to have those conversations with them about, hey, you want to put this information out? What you have is accurate. You have accurate. But I want to tell you why we don't want it out yet. And every conversation that I have with a reporter like that, they're fine. They want to know why. But if I can, hey, look, You're right. You have the suspect's name, you have his picture, but we're not ready to release that because as soon as it hits the media, we're afraid he's going to kill somebody else. I mean, that's kind of a bad, but you get what I'm saying. Explain to them why it can't go out there. Don't just say, don't say it because we said so, or we're not ready. It's okay to give them the why. Try not to get frustrated with things that are being released outside of your control. As law enforcement, as school officials, the media knows we're not going to tell them what they want to know. We'll tell them what they need to know, not what they want to know. But they're going to find out. The media has incredible sources. They're going to be interviewing people, students. One of the things that made me furious at the Noblesville West Middle School shooting was the news crews that stood outside the school and put a camera and a microphone in front of an 11-year-old kid's mouth and said, "Tell us how you're feeling about this." Terrible. But try not to let that frustrate you. They're going to do what they're going to do. You do what you need to do. This is I pulled this off. I don't know all the details, but a student was shot at an Atlanta school, and I thought this was great work by whoever was running their social media. Because, and the messages aren't that important, but look at the timestamps, right? At 4:20, the student suffered a gunshot injury. Then 4:21 the next message, 4:23 the next message, 4:24, 4:25, 4:31, 4:32, 4:33. They are getting good messages out there, quick, simple. We still don't know the details of what happened, but I know if my kid was at this school, I'm glued to this feed, and every time I get a message, it's giving me something to do. And it continues. They put out a copy of their press release so that everybody can see the same thing the media is seeing. And I would recommend, if you are not offering your press releases for the public, you should be. Don't rely on the media. Don't send out an email to only the media and say, "Hey, we need you to put this out." Whether it's put it on your website, your social media, or whatever, in today's world, news releases are not just for the news, right? Just for instance, in the Indianapolis district, when I send out a press release, whether it be about a crash or a crime or whatever it may be, that email goes to over 19,000 people, right? About 2% of that is the media. So keep in mind, give people the ability to read your press conferences. Again, this is just good examples of messaging because I feel like they were consistent, they were clear, and that's what they need. And this is planned ahead of time. This is, hey, if something bad happens, know which platform you're going to go to and make sure the public knows. The Indiana State Police will almost solely rely on Twitter in a crisis situation. If I have to communicate by crisis, I'm likely not sending emails, I'm not answering phone calls, I'm texting or I'm tweeting. That way I can reach the media, I can reach anybody else who wants to follow along. And that's why it's important to understand what you're going to use ahead of time so that you're familiar with it. Because could you imagine under a crisis saying, "Hey, here, you're my communicator, I need you to tweet out some information," and then I walk away and you realize you don't have the password. You don't have the access to the account. You've never used Twitter before. You don't know what a hashtag means. You don't know how to tag anybody. You don't know how to add a photo. Make sure that you know what you're doing. What about the media? And I'm going through some of this pretty quick, but it's important. And I know you guys kind of already had a class earlier. I peeked in and you were talking about media, so I don't want to overdo this, but managing the media. First and foremost, always be honest. If you are ever caught in a lie by the media or by the public, you have lost your integrity. You've lost your credibility. Do not lie. Be transparent. Be open. Be willing to tell them. Never ever say the words "no comment," right? If you ask me a question and I say "no comment," what does that tell you? It tells you I'm hiding something, right? I know, but I'm not telling you. There's better ways to say "no comment" than saying "no comment." It's absolutely okay in a live interview with 15 cameras in your face to say, "I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. I'll get it for you." It's also okay to say, in a matter of words, "I know the answer to your question and I'm not telling you." But there's better one-liners than that, because communication is more than just words, right? One of the best, and I'm not saying this because he's in the room, one of the best communicator speakers that I know is Superintendent Carter. when he talks, people listen. Why? It's not only because the words that are coming out of his mouth, it's because of his body language, his ability to humanize what he's saying. And so if somebody asked him a question that he knew the answer to but couldn't tell, he's likely going to tell them why. Hey, look, that is something that we know, but we're keeping it close because it's information that's valuable to our investigation. Or, you know what, you guys have great questions, and they're the same questions that we have. And that's the purpose of an investigation, is to answer questions. So right now, we are under an investigation. And until all of those questions are answered, I can't tell you. So keep in mind, there's better ways. Never say, be available. The media doesn't work 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, right? Today's Friday. I guarantee at about 3:30 this afternoon, I'm going to get a call from some reporter somewhere asking me to do an interview. 3:30 on a Friday afternoon. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, just waiting for you to call, right? No, they don't work business hours. Be available to them, though. Go out of your way. 3 times in my career, I've done an interview standing in the driveway of my house in Sheridan, Indiana, because I told the reporter, if you want me to talk, that's fine, but you're going to need to come to my house. Okay. I'm willing to meet them halfway. I'm willing to be available, but it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, hey, I can do it this time, and that, when I first became PIO, it almost killed me because I wouldn't say no to anybody. They could call me at 1:30 in the morning on a Saturday night and say, hey, can you do yep, I'm getting dressed, I'm on my way. Right? It's okay to say no or to get somebody else to do that. What about off the record? What if the reporter says this is off the record? What does that mean? I'll tell you this, knock on wood, I have yet to be burned by a reporter having an off-the-record conversation. You know why? Because I don't do it very often. I don't trust them. I'll work with them. I develop relationships with them. But you would be naive to believe that if they get enough information that's going to give them something that just boosts them out of the universe, they're going to use it. Now, every reporter I've had this conversation with, hey, our integrity is everything, and if we burn somebody one time, we'll never get another job and all that. And I do get that. I do get that. Be careful if that reporter says, hey, I'm off the record here. But answer, yeah.
I'll add to that, having been a reporter, I will not use this information. It's just, I just need it for background. Okay, you give it to me. I go to another source and say, here's what I hear.
Yeah.
Can you confirm that?
Yep. And then once you confirm it, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Your name's never mentioned. I'm getting it from another source.
Yep. Great point. So the media will not give up their sources. I'm telling you, I've tried. I think it would take a federal subpoena almost sometimes to get them to get their. I'm telling you, the media will call you with accurate information that you think only 3 people in the universe know, and they know it. And they're going to call and say, hey, what do you know about this? And you're like, gosh, where'd you hear that? Because it's right, but I didn't want you to know, right? So sometimes in that instance would be a good time to go, hey, off the record, you're right. But here's why we can't release that right now. And there are certain reporters that I've built a relationship with that I trust more than others. That's a human thing, right? There are some reporters that I know that if I get a phone call from them, there's always an ulterior story. There's always a different motive than what they're asking, right? So keep that in mind. Know your reporters. Local newspapers. You guys all probably have local newspapers, local social media news, whatever it may be. Sometimes those people are worse than the bigger ones because they're trying to compete with the big channels and the big operations. They're willing to burn you a little bit quicker. Real quick, the interview. Setting up an interview with the media. Think about your location and your backdrop. What's behind you? One of the best examples of the worst backdrop I can think of is Ferguson, Missouri after the Ferguson shooters. That police chief stands outside where it's loud, they're next to a highway, and behind him, he has about 4 or 5 of his police officers with their sunglasses on, standing around with their arms crossed like this. What kind of message is that sending to the public who he's talking to, right? Think about what's behind you. Think about your body language. Think about a place that's accessible to the media. At Noblesville West, our first news conference was done at the golf course. Plenty of room, plenty of parking. We were at the golf course. But I knew that wasn't going to last long, right? The media is not going to stay a mile away from the school all night. So as soon as I was available, I said, hey, I tell you what, I worked with the people on scene. I said, hey, let's get them closer. Let's get them close enough where they can do something, but not in our way. But we got them right in front of the school. There was an area there for them, and it was perfect because since I gave them that, they weren't wandering around. But if I say, hey, all of you guys stay here, I'll be back in an hour, they're wherever, when we lose control. So give them somewhere to go. Tweet that out. A lot of times, I'll put out a tweet to and I'll say, media staging is at this location. They know if they want information from me, they got to be at that location. Don't deviate from that. Don't give a reporter something if they're not at that spot that they're supposed to be, because you're only rewarding their bad behavior essentially for not listening to what you need them to do. Before the interview, ask for the background information. What's the story going to be about? What are you airing this with? Especially if it's one of those off-the-wall, odd interviews. You know, you haven't done anything, you haven't put anything out, and then they want to ask you these questions. Ask them the questions ahead of time. Predetermine what they're going to ask, right? If you're a superintendent, a principal, and you're going to do a news media interview, hopefully you have a PIO or communications people. I don't know how often that is, but that's their job, right? If the superintendent is going to do an interview with Rafael Sanchez and it's coming through me, I'm going to say, hey, Rafael, can you send me a list of your questions? Boom, that gives him time to answer those. And sometimes some of those questions are going to say, hey, don't ask me that. We can't talk about it. Here's why. Please don't ask that question. And I've learned so much in my time from Dave Burston, and it threw me off one time. My very first live interview ever, it was in studio. I wasn't even the PIO yet, but we were talking about our active shooter program. And it was in the aftermath of one of the school shootings. It was the Orlando nightclub. In the aftermath of the Orlando nightclub shooting, and I said, hey, look, I can talk about our program, but I can't talk about Orlando. I don't know. I'm not involved. Please don't ask me about Orlando. This is before I go in studio. I step up, and the very first question out of the reporter's mouth is answering me, you know, tragic situation down in Orlando. What can you tell us about what's happening down there? I panicked. I mean, it shut me down. I was prepared to talk about our program, and when I watched that interview back, I realized how awful I did because I wish I would have known how to handle that. I gave our thoughts and prayers, we're monitoring closely, blah, blah, blah. But what Dave Burston told me I should have done, and I wish I would have done, is I wish I would have looked that reporter in the eye on live TV and said, you know, unfortunately, we agreed before this interview that we weren't going to talk about Orlando, and actually I feel quite disrespected that you would ask me that question leading off this interview because I was here to talk about the Indiana State Police unarmed response to active shooter. Call them out. I wish I would have known that, but I didn't. And I don't even know if I would do that today. That's just not my MO, but I wish I could. I wish I would. Stay in your lane, stick to your message. Understand what you want your message to be, and that media might start steering you in a different direction. Stick to your message. Stick to what you want to talk about. That you don't have to answer all their questions. And it's okay to say the same answer a couple times. They might ask the same question 2 or 3 different ways. It's okay to stick to your same answer. Lastly, avoid personal opinions. Nothing will get you in a trick bag faster than saying, I think, we want, because everybody has an opinion. But the moment that I get on camera and say, I think, I become biased. I become biased to whatever I think in the community's eyes. And so keep that in mind. Always avoid, if they ask you your personal opinion, how does this make you feel, all that, avoid those. Say it's not about the way I feel, whatever you want to say. Last thing I'm going to say about being a communicator, being a PIO, is an old school Journey song, and it is simply, we didn't start the fire, no, we didn't light it, but we're trying to fight it. That's the world of communicator, of PIO, is we are your best asset when it comes to crisis. If you don't have somebody prepared to be your communicator in a crisis, you need to. And it's not, if you're a superintendent, principal, whatever it may be, it's probably not going to be you. There's going to be a time where you're going to get in front of the camera and talk. There's going to be your opportunity. But your communicator has got to be out front the whole time. That has got to be their role. They've got to know their role. So, not an easy thing, but communication is key. And I went through that pretty quick, but I'm happy to answer questions. remember that the cameras are always on. And our troopers have a hard time with this sometimes. Let's say it's a tragic, fatal crash, and there's white sheets on the ground, the media is filming from far away, and I see somebody that I haven't seen in 5 years. And I'm like, hey man, big handshake, big hug, how's the kids? Oh yeah, man, let me show you this picture of this deer. And we're smoking and joking. And the media zooms right in on us. And my big old smile, and here's two people under a white sheet. Remember, in a crisis, the cameras are always rolling. Your body language has to dictate that, right? It's real easy for me. I'm a pretty emotional person, so if I'm talking about something emotional, I'm naturally going to do that. But be natural. Be natural. It's okay to show that emotion, right? They don't want to see a talking robot. They want to see a person. I'm going to bring up Superintendent Doug Carter for a few minutes just to kind of close us out, and I know you guys are trying to get to lunch. So, yeah, Superintendent?
Very quickly, everybody. First of all, thank you for the invite. But I also think after listening to what's been said today and what's been shown, I owe you an apology too. People think we're in a really tough spot, law enforcement today in 2019 and beyond. You're in a worse spot, and we have to acknowledge that. You're expected to be all things to all people, have all the answers, and be able to solve any crisis within a family. And we know that that's an unreasonable expectation, and it's important that we talk about that. I never thought that talking with Dr. Hogue all those years ago in that little country school that was Hamilton Southeastern High School at the time, on a little bitty two-lane road that was just chip and sealed, that Indiana would ever fall into the position of becoming a national statistic. We had 2 school shootings in Indiana in 2018. It changed us forever, right? It changed our world. In Noblesville, we had a significant footprint there, and Kevin Jowett, the police chief, is a very dear friend of mine. And I'll never forget that day. That was the first one that any of us were able to actually be a part of and see what happens. And it's not just a response to that crime, remember. It's a response to a community, and there's nobody articulates that better than John Perrine. It's a response to a community. And I remember Dr. Niedermeyer, who's the school superintendent there at Noblesville, and all of a sudden she looks like she had seen this ghost. And she said, oh my gosh, I gotta get to the hospital. I've gotta get down there and see Jason. I've gotta get down there and see Ellen. We hadn't thought about that because of the circumstance. We cannot prepare for every circumstance. So I looked out and I thought, there's our helicopter, put him in it. So that's what we did. We loaded her up and loaded the school principal up. We flew him to Indianapolis. We had rides waiting for him there at that Methodist hospital. They got to go see Jason, got to go see Ella, and they were back within about 50, 55 minutes. Those kinds of things are what we plan to do that we don't plan to do, that we have to figure out a way to get that done. Beth came back and she was just totally calm. It was unbelievable to watch, something so simple like that. But dang it, our world's a mess. Our world is an absolute mess. And we have footprints in every county, or boots in every county in Indiana. And these are the things that just scare me to death. So, you know, and as John so well articulated, and Doc has put his whole heart and soul into this for so many years, we're being caused to be something different than what we are, aren't we? All of us. And we're expected to have all the answers, and we don't. The Richmond school shooting, we could spend hours talking about that. And that we had full responsibility for that shooting in the city of Richmond. And it's very, very different than what we experienced in Noblesville for a number of reasons. It just was. It was very different. Parents are pissed off. They're really angry, and they want their kid. And I remember that on 9/11. My daughter was 5 years old, and man, I was going to go through anybody and anything to get to that elementary school to get her that day. And man, is that on steroids today? And you're expected to be able to mitigate that. And I'm here to tell you that we'll stand with you because you can't. In the auditorium at Richmond High School, people were screaming and yelling at me that you're going to give me my kid back. You're not going to talk to them without me being there. What they got to say doesn't matter. Well, calm. And man, it was an uncomfortable situation. But those are all the kinds of things now that we are now a part of this conversation on a national level. And it's this kind of thing that's so critically important. So when Doc said he was coming down here, gosh, I said, man, we want to go with him. We want to go with him. We'll stand with him almost anywhere that we can, in support of you, in support of you. This nonsense that any one agency is going to do this is ridiculous. There's not an agency in Indiana that can do it on their own. Who's in charge? Who cares? We gotta get beyond, we all gotta get beyond that. Schools, police, fire, EMS, public safety people, doesn't make any difference. We gotta get beyond that. 34 people or 33 people were killed at Virginia Tech University. The Virginia State Police had 500 troopers every 3 weeks. And that all happened in 3 classrooms. Just to keep it in context. We do it together. It doesn't matter what color shirt we have. You should expect that from us, and that's what you'll get from us, I assure you. With all that said, I just want to say thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and we'll continue to deal with this complicated world that we have. So I certainly wish all of you well. Thank you.